All the cards in Fire Emblem the Blazing Blade were stacked against Renault. He joins with a maximum of 2 chapters still remaining, as a bishop that is more useful for the fortified staff he carries than his actual stats, and the little dialogue we get from him upon joining your side does nothing to draw up any intrigue whatsoever. It's a recipe for disaster. All the elements are there to create the most forgettable character the series has ever seen. And yet, if you've ever taken the time to look deeper into Renault, you will quickly find he's one of the most memorable characters in not just the Blazing Blade, but the entire series. Not that anyone found that out through actually playing the game, since you have to grind supports for turn after turn after turn after turn with little time to actually find out what's up with Renault. But hey, you don't have to do that, you have me. So let's get started with probably the most frustrating part of Renault. Despite joining at the last hour of the game, we already encounter him a lot earlier, in the paralogue after chapter 18 or 19 depending on the mode, in Prisoner of Magic. There is literally no reason why Renault couldn't just join us here, but alas he doesn't. Instead he says he's on a pilgrimage, wishing us luck in defeating the black-robed opponents, and hands us a goddess icon for good measure. 4 bang-average lines of dialogue are all we get from him until we finally meet again in chapter 30 Elliewood or 32 Hector, Victory or Death. Renault is hiding in the ruins to the northwest, and reaching him before turn 12 will make him recruitable. So yeah, not only has Renault so far been entirely unexciting, he's also completely missable. But even if you reach him in time, you get some recruitment dialogue that similarly does not exactly draw up intrigue. He says he'd hoped to avoid battles by heading to the Dread Isle, which has now failed, and since fighting with you will lead to tranquility, he joins your cause. That's all you know by the time he joins your army. No more, no less. Hell, not recruiting Renault actually builds up more intrigue, as he will emerge from the ruins after 12 turns saying, "It seems I cannot escape my past after all." Sure, it's too late to do anything about it now, but finally we have the first little sliver of information that does more than Renault than just being a boring man of the cloth. And as soon as we begin looking into his supports, we're hit by a tidal wave of information that will change the way you look at Renault forever. As that little quote already alluded to, the key here is Renault's past. It's mysterious, intriguing, and different from any other character we see in the Blazing Blade, and told entirely through a handful of supports, with Canas, Wallace, Lucius, Isadora, and to a lesser extent, Barter. We find out that the seemingly standard bishop of the Saint Elamine clergy is not who he pretends to be. As Isadora finds out, he has little confidence in his own abilities as a man of the cloth, more or less refusing to perform what you would consider the basic jobs of a priest. Barter is immediately able to tell that Renault is, as he puts it, a true warrior, one that may say mass on Sundays but fights during the week. Well, that isn't exactly true. Renault's past is one filled with blood and combat. Once upon a time he was a mercenary in service of Kay Lin, one so strong and powerful that even a young Wallace looked up to him. While he is unable to connect the dots that the legendary mercenary Renault that he used to be a fanboy of is actually the same person as the bishop before him, we as players can see that this is most definitely the case. In fact, Renault's history is even hinted at through his stats, which are far from impressive for a bishop and actually look much more like a spread a hero would have, indicating that the role of bishop is one Renault doesn't really have a talent for. It's merely one he created for himself in an effort to atone for his sins. Because yes, while Renault may have been Wallace's hero once upon a time, the bald general was surely not referring to the person Renault would end up becoming. Somewhere along the way, the timeline is hard to discern, but we know it was during his mercenary days that Renault lost a friend dear to him. This completely destroyed him, presumably throwing him into a dark spiral of grief and depression. Or, as his support with Lucius beautifully puts it, sickness of the soul. And as Renault himself says, those are usually the hardest to heal. So hard in fact, that Renault got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Through unknown means, he comes across the dark druid Nergal, and aligns with him after learning about his plans with morphs, in the hopes that Nergal will be able to revive his fallen friend. In return, Renault would serve as a human guinea pig for Nergal's experiments. And while we don't know what this exactly entailed, his support with Kanas suggests it possibly went very far. I mean, in their final conversation, the suggestion is even made that Renault is a morph himself. Personally, I wouldn't go that far, mostly because all longtime morphs we see have striking golden eyes, which Renault does not, and he still seems to hold on to his emotions and a certain independence that no other morph, not even Kishuna, has. I wouldn't be willing to go as far as to say he's still 100% human, he even says so himself, but I do not think he's a morph. What he is though is a man with blood on his hands. Another part of his job description at Nergal Incorporated was to collect quintessence, and seeing as this was still in the early days of Nergal's plans, it appears likely that he was actually one of the first quintessence collectors Nergal had access to. One possible victim of Renault's hunt for this mysterious life energy is one he later stands face to face with. In one of the best support chains, and not just the Blazing Blade, but the entire series, we find out that Lucius's father, a renowned and powerful mercenary, was murdered in cold blood by no one other than Renault. Now, I've seen quite some people suggest this happened after the death of Renault's friend, but before he teamed up with Nergal, to the point this timeline is even described on the Fire Emblem Wikia. But when I see these supports, I'm thinking Lucius's father was a victim of his desire for quintessence. As Renault puts it, he killed him in his singular drive to regain a friend he lost, saying he even sacrificed the lives of others. To me, that suggests these victims were made to harness their quintessence, which is further supported by the fact that Lucius says his father was a famous mercenary, meaning he was a great source of quintessence, as we found out during the game that there is a direct connection between one's power and strength and how much quintessence one holds. Eventually, Renault's hard work pays off. Nergal proves a man of his word and creates a morph of Renault's friend. However, as we know, morphs are hardly the person they were in life, and so Renault is distraught at the result. As he puts it in his conversation with Kanas, morphs are life with the meaning stripped away. His friend's body was no more than a puppet. It wasn't the person it used to be in any way, shape or form. In his conversation with Nergal, he even goes as far as to call the morph a curse. I have over the years seen some theories and rumors that the idea here is that Kishuna is actually Renault's former friend. Possible evidence for this could be the fact that Kishuna is the most human-like morph we know of, suggesting that Nergal did genuinely try to bring back Renault's fallen friend as best as he could. However, Kishuna's backstory is known and features no other people than Nergal, who seemingly cast Kishuna aside as a failure. But in his final conversation with Renault, he says the resurrection of his former friend was completed, which isn't a word I think Nergal would use to describe Kishuna. While he doesn't outright refer to the morph of Renault's friend as a success, the undertones in his words are too positive for me to believe it is Kishuna. To me, this theory has always felt more like an effort to connect two mysterious characters together when there's really nothing to properly connect them. But anyway, horrified at what he now finds his friend to be, Renault realizes the error of his ways. The atrocities he has committed have been for nothing, and so he abandons Team Nergal. In an attempt to atone for his grave sins, he joins the Saint Elamine clergy and becomes the bishop we eventually meet him as, although his reason for being at the Dread Isle, the aforementioned pilgrimage, may be another of his lies. His line for the final chapter has him saying this is what he has lived for, indicating that facing Nergal and bringing him down has always been the reason why he came to the Dread Isle. But he is definitely not of the opinion that completing that goal washes him clean of all guilt. Despite Lucius forgiving him for the murder of his father in their support, Renault will always disappear and not be seen again following the events of the Blazing Blade. Even if he is paired up with Isadora and the two become a couple, he will vanish and leave his apparent love interest without a clue what has happened to him. She will eventually join the Saint Elamine clergy as well, looking for answers, but seeing as he doesn't seem to be a true man of the cloth, I doubt she ever found them. It's a painful ending. It's not often a paired ending has such a negative tone to it. But it also fits Renault to a T. As his solo ending puts it, no one knew the old him, no one knew what became of him. Renault is as interesting a character as he is a bad unit. And while the entire full story of Renault's life isn't known and set in stone, the glimpses we do get paint a picture of one of Elite's most interesting figures. Not only is Renault arguably one of the most morally reprehensible units we have ever been able to use, the fact that at the point where we meet him, it's hard not to feel at least a little sympathetic towards his story says enough about how well written it is. That's not to say there are no questions remaining, just to be clear. A simple one is brought up by his support with Kanas, which is the timeline. Kanas mentions that the development and research into the morphs dates back centuries ago, which Renault corroborates, but also suggests he was there for it. He says his role in Nergal's plans was a long time ago, and while he never outright says, yeah, I was there helping Nergal in ancient times, it is definitely hinted at. But if that's true, then how can the mercenary Renault be Wallace's childhood hero? That implies the story of Renault, as I've described it so far in this video, all happened in the last say 20 to 30 years. I wouldn't go as far as to call it a plot hole. It is for example possible that the mercenary Wallace looked up to was actually the quintessence hunting Renault, not the pre-death of friend Renault, but that's definitely not the logical way to look at all this. Also interesting to note is that Renault's first comment when seeing Nergal is "Do you remember me?", which may indicate Renault believes Nergal is way past it and might not even realize who he is, or it is to indicate they haven't seen each other for a very long time. Whether a decade counts as a long time, or whether this is actually another hint at Renault being much older than we initially believe, is impossible to say, but all this just shows that even with the intriguing story we do know, even more mystery remains. It has made Renault a character that is very hard to forget, and one I really hope we learn more about one day, whether that be through a Blazing Blade remake or perhaps even heroes to add to his tale. After all, Renault may have all the elements of a forgettable character, but if you know his story, he is everything but. What are your thoughts on Renault and the theories that surround him? Did you even know he existed in the first place? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.